So you're not necessarily trying to finish the FCU, do something in a certain time.
They know it's automatic, but they know that every tractate has a certain amount of pages. Different tractates are larger. Some are, it depends on the tractate. Some are smaller, some are bigger. This is our tractate is one of the bigger ones, big ones. We know David only wants a big tractate. And that's going to take a while. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to make a party at some point when we finish certain chapters, after a certain amount of chapters in the tractate. Yeah. We'll make something there. Yeah. Yes. We are.
What's the next one? Next one.
Very good. Good. The right parties. You got to go to the right parties. Like I always say, life, you got to make the move. You got to make the right moves. You know. 7A, 7A1, our Carmelite. No, sorry. 7A2. They're on 7A2. On the bottom right. Amma Rabba Bar Shilam Rav Chizda, 7A2. The bottom right. Rabba, the son of Shila, said in the name of Rav Chizda. Levena Zekufa B'Rishut HaRabim. If you have a brick and you standing upright, the normal way that a brick stands, right? You have a normal way a brick stands. If you look at the picture, the number 19, the brick, you see there's the face of the brick, there's the top of the brick. So this brick, I think the most important part of the brick is to know that this brick, the height of the brick is 3 tvachim, is from the ground. If this would be the ground, let's say the beam, this table would be the ground. So if you put it on, if this would be the brick, right, Ralph is about to join us. So this brick, if I would hold the brick, the bottom of the brick to the top of the brick is 3 tvachim high, around 11 inches. Now we have, right, exactly. So we have a rule that, morning Ralph, we welcome Ralph. We have a rule that if you have something, if you have something on the ground, if it's within 11 inches of the ground, within 3 tvachim of the ground, it's like part of the ground itself. It's so close to, it's so negligible, higher, elevated than the ground, that it's as if it's on the ground itself. So therefore, if I would put this item on the ground, right, and then now would you say, does this item have its own, would be considered its own, own person, so to speak, its own domain? So if it's so small that it doesn't come up more than 11 inches, this is not 11 inches, so this will not be, it's as if it's part of the ground itself. So if I put this on the ground, right, and then on Shabbat, I go ahead, and the guy was carrying tissue on Shabbat in public property, and then he puts it, while he's walking, he puts the tissue down, he drops it like that, on the item. It's as if he put it on public property, because it's not considered its own domain. It's not considered its own, but however, but let's say the item was not less than 3 tvachim tall. Let's say if this would be 11 inches, it might be a little less than, it's less than 11 inches. Well, let's say this is a little bit taller, right? And I have this on the ground like this. We're starting to talk. Now this item starts looking like a, now it has, and then it's on, and then I put something, while I'm walking, I put it on top of this thing. Is that called that I put it in public property? Or do we say that since this item is it's a certain amount high, elevated over the public property, it's not, it's not the part of the public property itself. Now, if I would go ahead, we'll see. If I go ahead, if I have, let's say, a fig or something, a sticky item, and I want to go in, if I would attach it, let's say this is 11 inches. If I attach it, or it's 12 inches, 15, 20, if I would stick it to the side of this thing, the side is not considered a place that has its own identity that you place things on. It's not the side will be considered like the ground itself. It's like in the ear space. It's attached to the side. It's in the ear space of public property. And we said the ear space of public property goes till 10 tfachim. I mean, if I throw something higher than 10 tfachim, and I throw an arrow into the wall, and it goes above 10 tfachim, then I would not be liable on Shabbat if I throw something higher than 10 tfachim. But something which is within the 10 tfachim airspace, if I throw it within 10 tfachim, and then it would be obligate violation. However, but if I go ahead but if I have something which is 3 tfachim, 11 inches above the ground, and it has its own, and I place it on this like that, that would be, we would say, if it's higher than 11 inches, it's not, we don't look at this as part of this area, and it has its own identity, and I would not be chayav. I would not be in violation. Is that clear, everybody? Okay, so let's see what the Gemara now will say about this brick. So the Gemara says the following. Levain is the kufa b'reshut rabin. I have this brick that's standing in its normal fashion. The zarak, now a brick, the question, how big you want the brick to be? If I want a big brick, I make it, I have it, make it larger, smaller, how thick I want the brick to be. But if I have it, we said it's 3 tfachim, if it's raised 11, let's say 11 inches above the ground. V'zorak v'toch b'faneha. If I threw something and it attaches itself, so here we go, we have this brick. I'm in public domain. I'm in public domain. I picked up something. I threw something 4 amo, right? So there's a violation of Shabbat if you carry something 4 amo, let's say 6 to 8 feet in public domain, and then stop or put the item to rest. Or I throw something in public 6 to 8 feet. Here I threw it, but the question, and I threw it, and this was, let's say, 11 inches above the ground, and it attached itself to this side. So therefore, I would be chayav. Chayav. It is in violation. However, al gaba, if it was on top of the brick, which the top of the brick, since it has a certain height, it's already not called batel. It's not called part of the ground because it has its own height. And now, if I went on top of the brick, so I would be exempt, patur. I am exempt from bringing a korban chatat, from bringing a sin offering, because I placed it on something which is, it's not part of public property, this item anymore. The top of this item is no longer part of public property. It has its own identity, has its own surface, and I would go ahead and be exempt if I threw it on top of this. Now, is it forbidden for me to pick up an item in public property? Let's say I found a tissue in public property. Am I allowed to pick it up in public property and put it on top of here? So it would depend if it has, it's more than 3 tvachim high. We said it's more than 11 inches. It's not part of public property. If the side is still considered public property, it's in the ear space. The side is considered public property. It doesn't have its own identity. Warning asaf. This is not considered public property. Whether I'm allowed to put it directly on top of here, rabbinically or not, depends. If this has a surface of 4 tfachim, if this has 15 inches by 15, if this area is 15 inches by 15 inches, I would not be rabbinically allowed to place an item, pick up something in public property and put it on top here, right directly. But if this is does not have a surface of 15 inches by 15 inches. It doesn't even have the proper surface to be in violation of Shabbat. You have to put something down on the area of it has to be 50, it has to be down 15 inches by 15. It has to be down. If it doesn't have the size of 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, then I would even be allowed to pick something up and put it on top of this item. Okay, that's a little bit technical details. Whether I could rabbinically pick something up and place it immediately right next on top of here or not depends. We said it's high 3 tvachim, 11 inches, but it's depending on how wide it is whether I'm allowed to pick up something and put it on top of this item. So now, Abaye v'Rava d'Amrit Havayu, Abaye v'Rava said that Duhu shekavoa shlosha tvachim. That's if it's high, like we said, 3 tvachim, 11 inches. So therefore, it's no longer part, the top we look at no longer as part of public property. Now, the lo dasi be'rabim, because if you have something that's high, elevated, see, if this item, this will be standing in public property, would people be able to step on top of it? No, because it has its own height, like a fire hydrant. A fire hydrant, it's more than 11 inches high. It's less than 10 tvachim. It's less than, was probably 40 inches high. It's shorter than 40 inches high. And this item, this fire hydrant, seems to be like no one's stepping on top of it. No one's walking on top of that fire hydrant. Higher fire has a certain height. And therefore, the fire hydrant itself gets its own status. It's not the status of public property. Even though the fire hydrant is actually in public property, but if I would put something on top of the fire hydrant, if I put something on the side would be considered, it's like, because the side has no power to itself. It's not like a surface. And therefore the side is like part of the regular public area, the public space. But the top has its own identity because it has a top, has a surface, and because it has a surface that that you put things on. This makes has its own identity, and therefore the top of a fire hydrant would be considered a place that's not public property. If you would pick up something from public and place it on top of the fire hydrant, it went from public to a fire hydrant, which is not a place of obligation. It's an exempt area. If I go from the public property to my house, problem. House to public, problem. 4 amot in public, problem. But if I go from public, I'm right in the pub, right next to the fire hydrant. I pick up something, I put it on top of the fire hydrant. It went from public to an exempt area. Is that clear? We call it a gray zone.
It's not public.
But so it's not public, it's not private. And if it's called an exempt area. Good morning, Emmanuel. But that's what the Gemara says, because an item that's standing in public property, that's high, a certain height, creates its own identity, and people don't walk on top of that. The Lodarsi Rabbi Rabim, people don't walk on top of that, and therefore that if you would place something on top of this item that's standing up, it's around a minimum of 11 inches high, and it's less than, let's say, 35, 40 inches high, that would be called non-public property and non-private property, and it would not be a violation of Shabbat. However, of a hismi vihigi, let's say you threw something, you were in public property, right? And it's a thorn bush, and you threw something, and it landed on this thorn bush. You had these thorns in public property, and it landed on the thorns in public property. Now, do people walk on thorns? Generally, most probably, many people don't walk on thorns. So it's not a place, it's not really considered public property. It's not a public place that people walk. It's not a place that people walk. So therefore, this rabbi says you did not violate the Torah law of going 4 amot, picking up something, throwing something 4 amot in public property, because it needs to, the violation of 4 amot in public property is when you pick up something in public and you threw it, let's say in public, and arrested either in private property or arrested in public property, right? But the thorn bush is not private and not public. Why is it not public? Because people don't walk on top of thorn bushes. So it's not called arrested in public property. By the way, to go from private to public or public to private, it's not, you don't need 4 amot. You don't need, it's just even one step from private to public or public to private is a biblical violation. If you step out and you stop. Now, of his mivhigi, afagav the logavir shlosha. It's the thorn bush. These thorns are not 11 inches high, but even though it's not 11 inches high, that means, but technically, people, it's not a place that people will commonly walk, and therefore, that area is not called public. So you can have something, it's in public property, but it doesn't have the status of public property. Just like if you would build put a booth in public property, it's not public. You don't walk on top of the booth, right? So it could become private property depending on the size of the booth. Now, but what about excrement, feces that were in public property? The dog, the person did not clean up after his dog. And now you threw something and it landed on that area, on that stuff. So there, one second. No, I skip. Chia Barav takes issue. He says the thorn bush, people would walk with their sandals. It's true. Without your shoes on, no one's walking on thorn bushes. But the fact that people would walk on with sandals, so therefore that's enough to consider it's called public. I mean, maybe people will try to generally avoid it a certain amount, but enough people will walk there. That's why I got to walk. I got my sandals on. I'm protected. Of a stoa, but on excrement, even though it's less than 3 tefachim, it's not 11 inches high. So we said usually whatever is less than 11 inches is part of public property. It does not get its own domain. It's not called its own thing when you're so low, when you're so tight, close to the ground, you're like the ground itself. But here, when it's excrement, when nobody's walking on excrement, therefore, he says that will not be public property. If you go in and you throw it, and it lands on the excrement, he did not violate the Torah prohibition of 4 amot in public property. However, Rav Ashi says, even afilu soa. He says, you would be in violation of Shabbat if you threw something and you threw something from public, it went 4 amot in public, it went 6 to 8 feet in public, and it landed on the excrement, it's still considered public. Question is, well, nobody's walking there. So his opinion is something which is within the 3 tvachim, which is so close to the public domain itself, meaning it's to the floor of the public property. If you're within that amount, it's like you're part of that. That's public. He holds that's called public property. He says anything that's found within 3 tvachim, within 11 inches of the ground, if it's found there, it's like part of the ground, does not get its own.
Wherever he goes, is it a sin?
No. So let's say he found the ball. He found the ball in public property. They were playing ball. He wasn't carrying. He found something in public. He picked up the ball in public, but they when they hit a home run and it went out of the park into the field. or other object he found, and he picks it up in public, or takes his yarmulke, starts walking with his yarmulke. Right, so the yarmulke case might not be the right case because you have to pick it up. Right, not that somebody had it. Well, let's say he stopped the public property. Now you stop, that's called you're resting. And then if you pick up your yarmulke after you stop and then you start walking, so now you uprooted the item by picking it up because you already had stopped. He picked up his yarmulke and he started walking, and then he threw it. I don't know if the yarmulke is a good example, but like I said, like, he picked up a ball and then he threw it 4 amot. So he holds if it goes on this item, which is less than 3 tvachim, if the excrement is less than 11 inches, it's like part of the ground itself. Even though people don't walk there, that's the big chidush. The big chidush, the novelty is, even though people will not walk on the dung, but it's still part on the excrement, but it's still part of the public property because it's so low. Now, continuing to, so we have a machlokas. So we have an argument whether if it landed on the thorn bush, whether it would be in violation. If it landed on the excrement, would be in violation. Amar Rabba bar Rav Shila. Rabba Shila says, Ki ata Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael. We are now on 7A3, top of the page. Ki ata, right side, top of the page, right side. Ki ata Rav Dimi, Amar Rav Yochanan. When Rav Dimi, when he came from Eretz Yisrael, he came back with a souvenir. What was the souvenir that he came back? The Torah that he learned in Eretz Yisrael. He brought with him back what he learned from his rabbi, Rabbi Yochanan, who was the big rabbi in Eretz Yisrael. And what did he learn? He said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ein Carmelit Bechuta Me'arba. A Carmelit, to be considered a domain that would be rabbinically prohibited to place something from public onto this domain or private onto this domain, it has to be at least 4 tvachim. It has to be at least 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, which means a surface an area of around 15 inches by 15 inches. Meaning to say, if this tissue box was placed into public property, and this tissue box was standing tall, and make believe this tissue box was at least 11 inches high, right? So it has its own life to it. It has its own distinct. It's not just a small little thing in public property that's negligible that we can just walk on top of. This thing is, let's say, a certain height. It's about 11 inches. Let's say, make believe it goes a little higher, right? And now, if I rabbinically, so on a Torah level, this item in public property is not part of the public property. If I would place something on top of it, because it has its own life of itself. But is there a rabbinic prohibition for me to pick something up in public property, pick up a ball or something and place it on top of this thing that's standing on public property, like placing something on top of a fire hydrant? Is there a rabbinic prohibition? The fire hydrant is not so tall, it's not 10 tvachim high, but it's 3 tvachim, it's more than 11 inches, between 11 and less than 35, 40 inches high. So on a Torah level, that will not be a problem to put something on top of it. Now, if you stop and then put it on top of it, then you stop. Then that's the problem. But if you were walking and you would place, while you were walking, or if you stop and you pick up something while you stop, like I said, next to the fire hydrant, you see a yarmulke next to a fire hydrant, and you would say you want to pick up the yarmulke and put it on top of the fire hydrant. So technically, it would seem you should be able to do that because you picked up the item in public property. You didn't walk 4 amot. You didn't walk. You're right next to you just placed it right on top of the fire hydrant. So it depends how the surface of the fire hydrant, is it 15 inches by 15 inches or less? If it's 15 inches by 15 inches, rabbinically, I will not be able to pick up something in public right next to the fire hydrant and put it on top. If it's less than 15 inches by 15 inches, which a fire hydrant, the surface is less than 15, I could technically pick up something right next to the fire hydrant and put it on top of the fire hydrant. All right? That would be the so that's what the Gemara says over here. It has to be in order to be a karmelit, in order to have the violation, a rabbinic, a domain that's called a karmelit, which we say is domain that has rabbinic restrictions. A karmelit, we said, let's say the ocean. We said, the valley. There's the benches in front of the stores. Certain areas that are not public but not private, but the rabbis are concerned that people might come to carry to real public or places. So the rabbis said that the karmelit is a rabbinic prohibition to do, to go from public to the karmelit, private to the karmelit, or even to walk 4 amot in the karmelit itself carrying something. But the only time there's a violation if it meets the measurements of a karmelit. But if it doesn't have certain dimensions, it won't even be, the rabbis will not even make a rabbinic prohibition on it. So that's what the Gemara says. We're trying now to identify this karmelit, this area that's called a rabbinic prohibition to carry in it, to place something on it. So he comes back from the Holy Land and he says, the karmelit can't be less than 4 tfachim. It has to be 4 tfachim. It has to have that surface. Like we said, if this would be in public property, it has to be much wider over here. You would have to have the top to be 15 inches by 15 inches, and the height, a minimum of 11 inches high, and we're going to see we'll see the height, meanwhile, the max. The minimum is 11 inches high. So now, the Gemara says, "V'omer Rav Sheshet v'tofeset ad asara," and it takes hold up to 10 tfachim. Up to 10 tfachim which is around 10 tfachim, is around 35 to 40 inches. This karmelit takes effect up to 10 tfachim. Now we're going to see what those words mean. The Gemara is going to explain exactly this part. My v'tofesed ad asara. What does it mean, these words, that it reaches a height of 10 tfachim? So, the Gemara says, if you're going to say that if this domain has a wall that's 10 tfachim high, that has to have a certain height, of a minimum height of 10 tfachim, of 35 to 40 inches, to be a karmelit, to be considered a rabbinic problem. Ve'ilo, but if it does not have a height of, meaning, let's say the thing that I was talking about, if it does not have a height of 10 tfachim, the item in public property is not 10 tfachim, it's less than 10 tfachim, it's 9 tfachim, less than 35 to 40 inches. Are you going to tell me it's not a karmelit? You tell me in order to meet the measurements of karmelit, you have to have a minimum height of 10 tfachim, which is the normal height of a wall. We learned in the Masechta Sukkah that a wall, to be kosher, for not only in Sukkah, to be considered a wall, it has to be a certain height. You're not considered a wall of protection, of wall to envelope, to contain a private area. You have to have a certain height to be considered a wall, correct? If you want to have a private area, if you don't have a certain height of a partition, that's not called private area. So if you're going to tell me you need to have also for the rabbin, just like the Torah domain of private property. Now we said if you have an area which is enclosed by 3 walls, right? That's called a private area. Some require 4 walls, but we said let's say 3 walls. You have 3 walls, and you have a certain amount, let's say you have a certain amount of space within the three walls, let's say, and we say that that's considered, each wall is considered it's private property now that you have something enclosed by three walls. But to be a wall, you have to have a certain height, right? You're not a wall if you want to make a sukkah. Could you make a sukkah from a wall that's less than 35, less than 40 inches? No, that's not a wall. So the same way it's not a wall over there, and you're not considered a wall to be considered a private area if you have walls that are less than that height. So you're going to tell me the same thing for this Carmelite, this rabbinic domain. You also need a wall that's that height. The Gemara says that's not true. The Gemara says, below, if you don't have a wall of 10 tvachim, if you don't have a wall that's that high, 35 to 40 inches, it's not considered a rabbinic domain that's prohibited. But we have the following interesting statement. We are now, what does he say? He says, if let's say you have a bayit, you have a house, you made a house, but you made the house so short that you made like a little type of house that, you have to crawl into. What do they call those houses they make? You get dark house, guest house, whatever. Sometimes kids play games and they make certain types of little houses, like a playhouse. Exactly. You made a playhouse in public property, let's say. Okay. Now, is that playhouse considered private or not? So if you make a playhouse, and let's say the playhouse has a height, each wall is 10 tvachim high. Each wall has the proper size of a wall, and you have a certain amount, and the wall has a certain amount of height and a certain amount of width, and that playhouse would be considered a private area. But let's say you have a playhouse where it's not that high. It's let's say that when you reach the ceiling of the playhouse, it's only 9 tvachim high. Let's say it's about 20 something inches, 30 inches, but not 35 inches. But the thickness of the ceiling, the roof, made the extra tefa. The thickness of the ceiling. So let's say here's the wall of the playhouse, right? Here's the wall of the playhouse. This wall itself was, let's say, 9 tvachim high off the ground. Now, so the area within the playhouse, the ceiling to the ground is 9 tvachim. It's not 10 tvachim. This is not, I don't have a space from the ground to the ceiling of 10 tvachim. From the outside, meaning from the top of the playhouse to the bottom, it's 10 tvachim. So the top of the playhouse would be considered private because it has the height of 10 tvachim. It has the height of 10 tvachim, and has the height of 10 tvachim, and it's also 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim. The width is also 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim, and therefore you would be able to consider a private area. So if you have this now, so I said, what do I do inside this playhouse? Can I carry within this playhouse? When I pick up something, play with my toys in the playhouse, and walk 4 tvachim, 4 amot, to walk 6 to 8 feet within the playhouse? I can't. Rabbinically, this playhouse resembles private, but it's not exactly private, because it doesn't meet the dimensions of private. And also, right, so this playhouse is not considered, it's considered an exempt area. It's also not public because, people can't walk on top of the playhouse, right, at a certain height. It's more than 3 tvachim. It's more than 11 inches off the ground. So it's not public, but it's not private either, because it doesn't meet the proper dimensions of private area. But the rabbis say you cannot carry from public into this area, from private into this area. The rabbis deemed this playhouse in public property would be considered a karmelit, a rabbinic area that's forbidden to carry within, and on top is you're allowed to carry on top, but the top is like it's private, but it has the dimensions of a private. Ben, you got that? 10 tvachim high. Again, but it depends. If the ground to the ceiling would be 10 tvachim, I mean the ground from the ground until here would be 10. Then it would be considered private property. If you have between the ground and here, and then you have walls, and you have the walls, and you have a space inside of like a shed, right? So that would be called private property. A shed is the private property you could carry within private property. You could carry on top if you want to walk on top of the shed and carry on top of the shed, just like on top of your roof of your building, is private property. But it's not. But you can. But here, that's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says. So you have bayit she'ein b'toch asara tvachim kiruyo, but it doesn't have 10 tvachim within the house, within the playhouse. But with this wall, with the roof, mashlim al asara, it makes it 10. So al gago on top of the roof, but it has the dimensions of private, because it has the height and it has the width and it has the walls. You could carry on top of the whole thing. But within this playhouse, since it does not have a height of 10 tvachim, it does not have a height, so therefore it's not considered private area. And the rabbis gave it a status of a karmelit. You could do within 4 amot. You can't carry 4 amot, just like you can't carry in public property 4 amot. You can't carry within this playhouse if it's not private. We will give it a status of rabbinic forbidden domain in the playhouse. So we see that you could be a karmelit, it could be this rabbinic domain, even if you're less than the height of what? Of 10 tvachim, of 30 or 40 inches. So the Gemara says, what does it mean? It holds up to 10 tvachim. So the Gemara says, the arasara hudavi karmelit. If you're within 10 tvachim of the airspace of this of this area, it's a karmelit. But if it's l'mayla masar tvachim, if it's higher than 10 tvachim, lo havi karmelit. It's not karmelit. The same way, if you throw something in public higher than 10 tvachim, the airspace that you throw it higher is not considered public property. It will not violate the Shabbat on a Torah level. So too, you would violate the rabbinic level if a karmelit, if you have this, let's say this ocean, and or this field, this valley, if you throw something 4 amot, but if you threw it higher than 10 tvachim, higher than that would not be in violation of the laws of karmelit. We'll see more tomorrow about it. I want to wish everyone a beautiful day. Morning, everybody. Boker tov. We are in a very sophisticated, complex Gemara over here. And Ben comes and jumps right in very well. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody.